Well, South Koreans are poised to sweep away almost a decade of conservative rule in an historic election today. 64-year-old Moon Jae-in has been the consistent favourite throughout the two-month presidential campaign. He's also been given an indirect boost by US President Donald Trump. For more on this, I'm joined by Robert Kelly, Associate Professor at Pusan National University and analyst at the Lowy Institute. Robert, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Moon has led the polls in this two-month campaign. What has made him such a popular candidate?
Well, his coalition is actually roughly the same as it was the last time that he ran for president. I'm not sure that he's actually really sort of exceeded expectations. I think the big change has been that there's just been a collapse in his opponents. The South Korean right has been very badly damaged by the scandal that brought down the president. She was a conservative. Her party supported her for probably too long politically, and their voters, a lot of center-right voters, are now sort of adrift. There was a centrist challenger, but he too has imploded in the last couple of weeks, and so I think Moon is going to win, not because he's a particularly better candidate than he was 5 years ago, but simply because the other candidates have fared so poorly.
Now, one of his major platforms is greater cooperation with North Korea, harking back to the Sunshine policy, where Pyongyang and Seoul would get on a lot better. How do you see that relationship playing out?
Yeah, I do actually think that Moon Jae-in will try something like the Sunshine policy again. He was one of its architects the first time through, from 1998 to 2007. I think the big problem is that there's a general consensus out there in the analyst community, I think broadly, that it didn't really work out too well. There is some dissension over this, but I think there's a consensus that the Sunshine policy, the South Koreans sort of paid a lot of money and provided a lot of diplomatic cover and didn't get a whole lot for it. In the background, North Korea continued to nuclearize and missileize. Their bad behavior hasn't really stopped. They haven't really stopped the human rights abuses for which they're so notorious. And I think this is one of the big challenges Moon will face if he wants to go back and do Sunshine policy too. I mean, what is different about North Korea? Why has North Korea earned this second chance? They continue to do pretty nasty stuff like deal drugs. They murdered that man with a weapon of mass destruction in the Kuala Lumpur airport just last month. North Korea is a global menace now, and the question I think for Moon is to prove that he can actually break through where others have not.
What do you think this would all mean for South Korea's relationship with the United States should Mr. Moon become president?
Right. I think there will probably be some tension at the top, if only for straightforward character reasons, which is to say that Moon Jae-in and Donald Trump are very different people. Donald Trump is, of course, flamboyant and ebullient, and Moon Jae-in strikes me as sort of the opposite of that. He strikes me as almost sort of professorial, kind of like Barack Obama, I suppose, somewhat reserved, very smart, a kind of professorial demeanor. And I'm trying to imagine the two of them in a room. I think it'll be quite difficult, to be honest. But on the other hand, there is a lot of interaction below at sort of bureaucratic level. I think the United States and South Korea have a fairly thick, dense network that will continue to sort of pull the alliance through. There has been tension in the alliance in the past. About 10 years ago, when George W. Bush was president, there was a liberal president here as well, and there was some tension and things were worked out. So I'm not sort of terribly pessimistic, but at the top, yes, I think there will be some struggles.
What are voters most concerned about there on the ground? Is it these international forces which they need to, and relationships that they need to take into account? Or will they be voting on more domestic issues such as the economy and jobs?
Right. It's mostly domestic stuff, actually, which I think is sort of a big surprise to a lot of Western media. If you've been paying attention to the news for the last month or so in the West, sort of war scares and nuclear war and things like that, you just don't see that here. I mean, they are aware of it, but the last poll I saw on this suggested that only about 23% of South Koreans think that international security and foreign policy are the most important issue in the elections. The big issue, actually, not ironically, unsurprisingly, is corruption. The president was just brought down by corruption. Corruption's been a problem for every Korean president since democratization in the 80s. It was a big problem in the Korean corporate sector as well. Korea's, to be honest, it's far too corrupt for a G20 economy. And this really needs to be brought under control. And there's a lot of focus on this. And this, I think, will be one of the big tests for Moon Jae-in, assuming he gets elected. I mean, can he get this under control? We've heard this before, and now it's really a big problem, right? I mean, a president just got sacked because of it. So something needs to give.
What would you say, finally, is the first order of business for the incoming president? Is it to reunite a divided nation?
Well, certainly, I think that's certainly there's a general consensus that unification would be a good thing. I think younger Koreans are less interested in that than older Koreans. Younger Koreans have grown up with North Korea more and more as a foreign country, and they don't feel the sense of bond to it that their parents and grandparents do. I think the first issue probably is going to be restoring some sense of direction to the South Korean government. The scandal that brought down the president has been rolling on since October. It's now May, so you've had like what 6 or 7 months, maybe more than that, in which there really hasn't been sort of clear direction at the top. South Korea's sort of been adrift while all these things are happening around it, and that's I think the most important thing is Moon's got to grab hold of the ship of state here and sort of steering in a direction, regardless of which way he goes. Once he actually gets the ball rolling, then yes, it'll be domestic issues like corruption and welfare and education. Those things will take over. I don't actually think that foreign policy will take over his administration.
Kelly, Associate Professor at Pusan National University and analyst at the Lowy Institute. Many thanks for your insight.
Thank you for your time.